Hi Shemai, Sitahi Krosoi, Chris Adoe, what is cracking? Ladies, gents, boys, girls, anybody who is literally anybody. Today we are talking about fighting fantasy Sword of the Samurai. Now, if you've got the Puffin edition, you're going to see that this is book number 20, but as I'm working off the Wizard editions, this is book number 25. And it is a fantastic entry into a big old series. And per usual, this book was originally published back in the 80s, 1986 by Puffin, and then by Wizard in 2006. And an interesting thing to note is that the original Puffin editions were written by Mark Smith and Jamie Thompson, and it said Steve Jackson and Ian Livingstone presents. But with the Wizard version, there's no reference of the original authors, it just says Steve Jackson and Ian Livingstone. So whether or not the rights were just sold when they were republished on the Wizard, who knows? But I think it's about time to talk about some covers before we get into the story. So without further ado, let's look at the Puffin cover, and the Puffin cover is honestly pretty cool. It's pretty badass. You got some undead samurai, you got a creepy little bridge, you got a river of blood filled with skeletons, and this is actually one of the encounters you have in the book itself. It is actually one of the coolest encounters that I remembered, and it's honestly a really interesting scenario. But how does this fare to the Wizards edition? And the Wizards edition is also pretty metal, pretty cool. It's very much the same thing. You've got the undead samurai, but it's a bit modernized, it's a bit edgier, it's a bit darker. It's very reminiscent of the classic 2000s covers, which I always mention because there seems to be a certain aesthetic around that time period, and this is quite noticeable in young adult literature. All in all, both covers are pretty cool. It's just that the Wizards edition shows the samurai to be a bit more skeletal compared to the Puffin edition, which shows them to be more like of an undead corpse kind of thing. But which one do I prefer? It's going to have to be the Wizards edition. The Puffin one is cool, it's just not quite up there for me. So with the covers out of the way, you pick up the book, you turn it around, you read the back of it, and what does it say? It says, the land of Hachiman is in grave danger, the shogun's control is slipping. Bandits roam the land freely, and barbarian invaders have begun to raid across the borders. All this because the Daikatana, the great sword singing death, has been stolen from the shogun. You are the shogun's champion, a young samurai. Your mission is to recover the wondrous sword from Ikiru, the master of shadows, who holds it hidden deep in the pit of demons. So the premise is actually pretty short and sweet. It's very cool. It is quite accurate as to what you actually do in the story. Your whole purpose is to find the sword, reclaim it, bring it back, and that's, well, spoilers, exactly what you do. The absolute one thing I will say though is, for me personally, I didn't really encounter bandits and I didn't encounter barbarian invaders in my adventure. Yeah, I met some dishonorable samurai who sort of turned their backs upon, what's his name, Hachiman, but I never actually encountered these. And then when I look back through the book, there's a lot cooler encounters, you know, more folklory, supernaturally stuff, whereas mine was pretty bog standard. And I believe, you know, it depends on which direction you take towards the beginning of the book. But speaking about the beginning of the book, you get to choose your own loadout kind of thing. It's similar to the previous ones. There aren't any special rules except you have honor points, and you get to choose one special ability from a selection of a good few. You got archery, you got a big old jump, you got fast draw, you got Nito Kenjutsu, which is just fighting with two swords, and that's about it. And for me personally, I went with the archery skill because archery is pretty cool. I thought that was pretty fun. But talking about honor points, I briefly touched upon them. I didn't briefly, I just mentioned them. If you are reduced to 0 honor points, you commit seppuku, which is a game over, which I thought was quite interesting. For me personally, it didn't actually happen to me. But you know, it is an interesting little punishment for acting like a douche. But as I said, my adventure was pretty well, it wasn't the interesting one, let's just say that, because looking through the book, you can encounter creatures such as kappas. You can encounter a Rokurukubi. It's the thing where its neck elongates and the head goes wandering. It's a really cool Japanese yokai. It's one of the ones that I quite find to be creepy. I quite enjoy reading about these online. It's a cool creature, it's a cool yokai. But like I said, you got kappas, you got this yokai. One thing I will mention is though, you meet an Oni, and the Oni doesn't really look like an Oni in the artwork. It sort of looks like a fella you'd meet on the construction site. It looks like a bricky rather than some sort of like demonic entity. You know, it is cool, but it's just kind of jarring when you look at it and you're like, oh, that bad boy there doesn't look like an Oni. But I digress. The adventure is actually pretty cool. I had a lot of fun doing it, and like I said, I picked the archery skill, and the archery skill came in handy quite a few times for me personally. I don't know if depending on what pathway you take, I don't know if you'll find different scenarios in which the archery skill just flat out doesn't come in handy, but for me it saved my skin, and I enjoyed that skill. There is one with leaping. I remember playing this book when I was young, and I used that skill, and I was like, oh, I just jumped over a wall, and now there's nothing to do. So I don't know if the leaping skill actually comes in handy in the book. Generally speaking, if you are planning on playing through this book, I'd say go for archery. It is a cool skill. It's probably the cooler skill, but you have other skills then, obviously, that might help more with combat, with the dice rolls and whatnot. Now, how does this adventure compare to previous adventures now? This one is pretty straightforward. There are no convoluted mazes that take up half the story, and it didn't really feel like a collectathon. You need to collect a few items, yeah, but your game's not going to be over if you don't collect them all. By and large, this is quite an easy adventure. It's not a difficult one, say like Creature of Havoc, where there's just so much math work you need to do to figure out what reference you need to be on. This one's pretty straightforward. Now, if you like samurais, then this is probably going to be up your alley. It's quite a nice adventure. You get to appreciate the setting a lot more. And speaking about the setting, this book takes place in Kull, which is new. Well, they say it's new. There are books that mention it, but this is the first adventure that you play in. If you're playing with the Wizard series, this is going to be the first time you go to Kull, and now Kull by and large is just basically fantasy Japan. So the monsters you encounter are pretty cool, the rules pretty straightforward, but you have a select few abilities. Well, you have one select ability. Archery is the one to go for. That's pretty cool. The difficulty is fairly easy, it's quite straightforward. It is not really a collectathon, although you do need to collect a good few items, which will help you rather than just result in a game over. You know, if you don't have them, don't worry. It's a fun little adventure. Little being the key word there, because this adventure felt quite short, although it is 400 references, which is the standard size for a fighting fantasy book. I completed the adventure pretty quickly, to be honest, and I wasn't using a guide. And I didn't cheat. It was just a very short, well, I'm not sure if it's short, it's just very easy. Is it easy, quick, straightforward adventure, which I enjoyed. So let's chat about the book. Should you get it? And in all honesty, if you are collecting the series, if you're just if this title just piqued your interest, I'm gonna say yeah, go for it. It is a fun adventure, and it holds true to the traditional fighting fantasy books. It feels very much like the rest of them in the sense that it's the same good formula, rather than it just messing things up. It is a really good book. It's very fun, it's very interesting, it's got the Japanese folklore element, and you're playing as a samurai. What's not to love there? If you are more interested in the more difficult books, well, this one doesn't really have much of a fight. Like I said, you know, Creature of Havoc, for me personally, it was more convoluted than difficult. It was more awkward for the sake of being awkward, but it was difficult. Now with Sword of the Samurai, it's not difficult at all. It is actually quite easy. The hardest part of the book is the riddles, and the riddles themselves, I'm not sure if I've just got a smooth brain, but the riddles were quite difficult in my opinion. Are the encounters worth mentioning? And yeah, you know, you're fighting Japanese yokai, what's not to like? You're fighting samurai, Japanese yokai, and then you got your generic fantasy demons sprinkled in. It's a fantastic little adventure. The ecosystem in this book is quite fun, it's quite natural, so to speak. In fact, you could probably turn this book into maybe like a D&D one-shot. It's something that I think would be quite easy. Well, maybe not easy, but quite straightforward, and it would be quite fun. So, all in all, how do I rate this book? And in all honesty, it's probably going to be in my top 10. And it's a solid 4 out of 5, you know. On Goodreads, I leave reviews on all of the books. This is a solid 4 out of 5, top 10 material, and generally speaking, playing as a samurai, fighting Japanese yokai, it makes for a nice refreshing change. It's a welcome breath of fresh air. And I think that about wraps it up, guys and girls, you know. Next week we're talking about a book called Bloodbones, which is about a spooky ghost pirate. That looks pretty amazing. I read it when I was younger. It is a fantastic little book. So if you're here next Thursday, I'm going to see you then. If not, hopefully you have a lovely life, a lovely week, and well, just thanks for watching. So without further ado, thanks for watching. Feel free to like, subscribe, comment if you really want to, and take care. Ta-ra.